all of the things that we call climate change, which are happening right now, everyone is aware of, they're all about water or lack of water. You know, big storms, floods, droughts, and wildfires. They're all about water or lack of water. And these are increasing. And so, when we hear about a fire in the Northwest or anywhere, and we ask ourselves, you know, people ask themselves, was this caused by climate change? And they begin to say, well, how does CO2 relate to these fires? I think we should ask some other questions, some, I think, obvious questions is, well, why is it dry?
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending upon where you are, and welcome to this perhaps 24th episode of the Life Saves the Planet series, co-hosted by Biodiversity for a Livable Climate and the GBH Forum Network. We are very pleased to see you all here and are looking forward to presenting you with a remarkable pair of speakers who will introduce a very remarkable film. So our main speaker today is John Feldman, who is a documentary filmmaker who Bio4Climate got to know in 2018 when an earlier documentary that he did called Symbiotic Earth, the story of Lynn Margulies, an evolutionary biologist whose work was very hidden from view and yet extraordinarily influential. We would not probably have earth sciences departments in universities if it were not for her work and her collaboration with James Lovelock of the Gaia theory. It was a very important documentary, and we were fortunate to go see it when it was showing elsewhere in Massachusetts, and immediately knew that we wanted to preview it in the Boston, Cambridge area, which we did in 2018. In addition to John as a documentary filmmaker, he's also a very creative person with many different ideas and a lot of history in filmmaking, including both shorter science films and fiction, and basically a very interested in many, many things and always kind of following whatever interests him with great intensity and diligence. So we, through that, we actually got to know John, of course, and John got to know Bio4Climate and got to know the kind of work that Bio4Climate has been doing for the last 10 years. And that did somehow lead John to get working on the film that we're talking about today, which is called Regenerating Life. And it, John, I think it's correct that you kind of started with people who you knew through us, people who'd spoken for us, and then took it from there and followed many leads, went many places on this planet to follow those leads, and brings us in this film to a real paradigm shift, to a new way of thinking about the causes of climate, and not new to many people, but new to the general public. John is going to be joined by Judy Schwartz, who is also a very long time friend and colleague of Bio4Climate's. In fact, Judy was the first speaker in this series 3 years ago. With Ben Goldfarb speaking about animals and their impact on the landscapes. So Judy's books have been seminal for many people, certainly for Bio4Climate and many other people. Her first book, Cows Save the Planet. Her second book, Water in Plain Sight. And her third book, The Reindeer Chronicles, introduced people introduced readers to people all over the planet who were doing different kinds of restoration, whose lives and their work were helping to restore the planet. So this is a very appropriate coming together of two people with similar interests and concerns right now. And I think you're really going to have a terrific time at this event. So I think I am going to stop now and and we will begin with a short video.
When I started this film about the causes and solutions to the climate crisis, I believed that the crisis was caused almost entirely by the rise in carbon emissions in the atmosphere due to our excessive burning of fossil fuels.
It's amazing. Humans, we said, yep, CO2 going up, therefore that's the cause. We've got to be very careful. This is not the cause, this is a symptom of a disturbed system.
We humans in the so-called civilized world have the insane habit of destroying the very thing that regulates our climate, the system of life. This film explores how the forests, fields, wetlands, and oceans regulate the Earth's temperature, and what we must learn from nature to reduce global warming.
Yes, it is water that governs 95% of the heat dynamics of the blue planet. Water. Simply by keeping landscapes cool and moist, we can effectively turn the greenhouse effect from high down to simmer, because the thing that determines the greenhouse effect is the amount of irradiation coming from the Earth. It's a total radical shift.
There is a growing movement of people who are regenerating life.
The basic principles are to maximize the recycling of water, energy, carbon.
So the whole idea is to build diversity.
And those ecological interactions give the whole ecosystem a very high level of resilience.
Let's keep the rain on the continents as fresh water longer.
If you want to solve the problem of climate change, you just take care of the soil.
Reversing these destructive 500 years of colonialism and 200 years of the fossil fuel age means a fossil fuel-free, poison-free agriculture.
And so, go to the land, come back to the land. To grow your own food gives you power.
The water and living landscapes narrative, the soil health narrative, is invaluable. Being able to build a movement in which people who are disagreeing about lots of other things can say, I want a landscape that helps my community and communities around the world have clean water, reduce flooding, be resilient to drought, have enough food, have fewer conflicts over land and water, have the beauty of diversity. Who can disagree with that?
Wow, I guess I can start asking the filmmaker questions. Yeah, so, people in the audience, that's just a glimpse, but this really is an extraordinary film. And I can say that as someone who writes books, it's very humbling because all I have to do is put words on a page, whereas a filmmaker is like John is dealing with language, science, imagery, sound, which, as I understand, was done by his wife, Sheila, for the film, and a lot of archival material. So all of that just requires an extraordinary amount of work. So I need to ask you, what got you, what compelled you to embark on a project that's this big and involves that much that much work?
Well, I have to say that whenever I start a project, I don't know how big it's going to be and how much work it's going to be. And of course, it always turns out to be a lot more work and a lot larger than I thought it was going to be. In this case, I started this film because I was concerned about the climate, and I had just made the film Symbiotic Earth about Lynn Margulis. And one of the things that she proposed with Jim Lovelock, which is part of the Gaia theory, is that the temperature of the planet is regulated by the sum total of all the organisms that live on the planet. And that it became a very intriguing idea to me. And then I remembered that she had also said that when you do an investigation, you have to go back to the basics. You have to go back to the beginning. So I decided I was going to make a film exploring the climate crisis. And I wasn't going to look at what was out there, but I was going to start from the beginning, and I was going to ask, what does control the climate on our planet? What have we done to mess up this control system? And what can be done about it? And that's how I started. And it really, there was a lot of serendipity involved. But when I had a screening of Symbiotic Earth in Hudson, lo and behold, you showed up. Judy Schwartz showed up. And I had just read your book, Cows Save the Planet. And I remember very distinctly that we were standing there in the hall and you introduced yourself. And I said, oh my God, I just read your book. And that was very important to me. And other things happened when I had the screening at outside of Boston. People from Biodiversity for a Livable Climate showed up and introduced themselves. I didn't know much about Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, the organization, but very shortly thereafter, the next day or something, Jim Laurie wrote me an email complimenting me about the film. And so I went to the website, and I was really blown away. And it was there that I was introduced to Walter Yaney, and started to look at some of the videos and started to read some of the papers. And that really started me down the road to make this film. As Paula said, biodiversity introduced me to lots of people, either directly or indirectly, and that led me to other people and led me to other people. And pretty soon I ended up with this great big project.
I really like what you said in quoting Lynn Margulis, that what you do is you go back to the basics. And, for me, in going, and it sounds like for you as well, that is part of both of our process, it involves asking basic questions.
Right.
And it really, because what we know, our knowledge, can really only be as rich and as accurate or as good as the questions that we ask. And sometimes we don't start with the basics. We start with what we think we already know.
Right.
And that's a huge, huge difference. And as I was watching the film and thinking about what you said, I wonder, what do you think Lynn Margulis would think of this film?
That's a good question. I think she'd be really pleased with this film. I certainly hope she'd be pleased with this film. She was very critical. And, I don't know that she would ever give me a compliment, but I think she would appreciate what I'd done, and she would have taken it further. And, she always said to people, yeah, but take it further, go further with it. One of the other things Lynn always emphasized and taught me was that the hard part is to give up things that you once thought were true forever, to give up your old truths in order to get a new perspective. And that's something that I've always lived with.
Well, that's really something powerful to think about, because we all hold on to ideas. So in doing this film, making the film, what were your biggest challenges?
I think the biggest challenge was confronting the popular idea that the warming on our planet is caused almost entirely by the rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This has become almost synonymous with the expression climate change. And I had to approach that very carefully, because very early on it became clear that that's really a very, very small part of the problem. But I didn't want to directly confront people with the new approach, because it might just turn them off. It might really send people the wrong signals. So that was a really big challenge. The second was that I knew very early on, having learned so much from Lynn, that I was going to take a systemic approach to the climate, that I was going to try to cover all the different aspects of this incredibly complex system. And I had to include a lot of things. And I had to remember that you can't say, oh, it's just water, or it's just soil, or it's all about trees, or it's all about carbon dioxide, or it's all about any one thing. You have to include everything. And that's quite hard, because it's a lot easier to just focus on one aspect and let others fall by the wayside. And I have to say that, there are many areas that I didn't cover as fully as I would have liked. One of those being the oceans and the effect of the oceans on the climate. That's a whole nother movie. Luckily, we do have Tom Gurrow, who is going to be on the panel in Tufts at Tufts. So anyway, that was the second biggest challenge.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. Did you find that when you talk to people, that is this something that you didn't want to confront and challenge people's views about what causes climate change too bluntly? Did you encounter that in conversations with people, or it was your reading the room, you're reading how people are talking about things?
So whenever I'm making a film, I always have a little pitch, and when people ask you, what are you working on? So I always start to tell them what I'm working on, and I try to tell them the story of the film. And that's a very good exercise, because I immediately begin to realize, what attracts them, what's interesting, what narrative I might follow. And it became clear to me very early on that if I started to say, this is a film about why carbon dioxide is not the problem, I didn't get very far.
Interesting. I like how you handled it in the film. The film starts off right away saying, I'm probably quoting it incorrectly, but when I chose to make a film about climate, I didn't expect to be exploring so much about water. So you weren't saying it's only water, but you bring the viewers, that piques the viewers' curiosity. So here we're exploring climate, and it's going to be about water. But not only is it about water, but you're surprised. That sets you up as the protagonist of the film. So the viewer is with you. So how would you describe the narrative of the film?
So you started to describe the narrative. I mean, my process of making a film, particularly something this complex, is to go out and talk to a lot of people who know about this subject, and to try to piece it together, and to learn from them. And my learning in this case was really a series of wonderments or a series of gee whiz moments. And yes, when I realized the importance of water, I had known that before. I was amazed. So the narrative of the film is really my learning adventure. As I was making the film and as I was talking to all these people. And so I take my learning adventure and that becomes the story, but I'm also the storyteller who is explaining it to you, the audience. And I hope to share with you a series of these, gee whiz moments, these incredible things that I learned, which are different than what we ordinarily think.
And you didn't know all that when you started the film.
Oh, no.
It's an incredible leap of faith that you will encounter these gee whiz moments.
Right. I never thought of it that way, but yes, absolutely. I guess I know how much I don't know, which is a lot, right? And so I keep questioning people and I, whenever you start to look at things in a different perspective, then all of these gee whiz moments start to come to the fore. And really this film, I've structured it as a series of these learning moments, because I think that most people are like me. They don't know all this stuff. And when they do learn it, they're thrilled. We could talk about some examples, but one of the biggest ones is really about the greenhouse effect. That we always think of the greenhouse effect as this blanket of greenhouse gases, and we concentrate on the gases. But what I learned from Walter and other people was that, let's not think so much about the gases. Let's think about where the heat comes from. And the heat comes from, initially it comes from the sun, but it is re-radiated off the surface of the earth. And that re-radiated heat is held in, to some extent, by these greenhouse gases. Why did they?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so why is the planet warming? It's because we have much more re-radiated infrared energy, heat, coming off the Earth. And why do we have more heat coming off the Earth? It's because we've bared the land. Anybody who's walked around in bare feet knows that sand or concrete or any bare land is a lot hotter than walking on grass or walking in a forest. And over the course of the last, thousands of years, we've bared about 40% of the land on Earth. And that is what's re-radiating all of this excess heat. So it's that heat which really is governing the increased greenhouse effect. And it's that heat that we have to stop. Sorry, go ahead.
You're saying, just to clarify, because this is not something that is talked about, as you just said, is that if we could, let's say, cover the land so it would be cooler, because there would be more transpiration. There would be transpiration happening on what is now bare soil. So that heat isn't coming off the land, even if we had exactly the same blanket of greenhouse gases, that we would have less warming. I just want to clarify that.
Absolutely. If we were to cover the land, if miraculously we were able to cover the land and grow back the trees, then it would hardly matter how much CO2 or methane was in the air, because the living system would handle it.
So this is really a radical view, and I know you have a clip on that, a little minute-long clip or so. So perhaps we could see that.
That's called What Drives the Greenhouse Effect. Yeah, we could look at that. I want to measure the bare soil of this plowed field. So that's 133. So now I'm going to go over here to the grass. 88. That's 45 degrees Fahrenheit difference between the bare soil and the grass-covered soil in the same sunlight.
And absolutely, the more we clear the land, physics dictates that it will have to re-radiate all that energy back, and that is a driver of the greenhouse effect, and that is what we have grossly disturbed. 40% of the land area is now absorbing heat because it's bare, it's dry, and re-radiating massively.
These are little promo clips that I made for the film. I made, I think, 10 of them, which are mostly taken from the film itself. Each one is a minute long.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary. I've talked to so many people in my reporting over the years that say that bare soil is so much the cause of what we're suffering from. Not only the warming per se, but also our water problems, because it just evaporates moisture immediately and cannot, bare soil is depleted soil, cannot soak, is not a sponge that can soak in and hold water. But yeah, just right there, it's really dramatic. What's the difference in temperature?
So that was 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was the same piece of, ground. It was just grass versus soil. And imagine if there were trees. So I just want to add that, a lot of this stuff I got from your book, Water in Plain Sight. And others have written about it, but you took a subject and really went into it in great detail, and I have to thank you for that. It's amazing that, again, we don't think about it, but the soil, good, healthy soil, holds water. It's like a sponge. And as you said, and the sponge holds the water, but if you don't have that sponge, and this is what happens in industrial agriculture, where they've plowed the soil and then they've used chemicals which kill all the life in the soil won't hold water. When the rain comes, it rushes off. The water rushes off. And so it dries out very quickly. We go from flood to drought in no time at all. And the land is just drying up constantly. So in addition to having this excess heat from the bare land, we also have the problem that the cooling mechanism on Earth, which is water, and as water flows through living systems, that's what cools the planet. We've broken that. We've broken the water cooling system by destroying the soil and also destroying the forests, which is, another big subject of the film is the forests.
Yes, definitely. And I know that you've drawn on, or you interview Anastasia Makarieva in the film, and she has also been featured in one of these events, online events. So the making of the film has taken several years, and in these last few years, particularly this year, we've had lots and lots of major, I guess you can call them weather/climate events. I don't know if that, makes you feel like more passionately about, getting the word out about this film, or anyway, it's been kind of a moving target. Climate has been a moving target.
One of the things I have to add, getting back to, some of these gee whiz moments, one of the things you begin to realize is all of the things that we call climate change, which are happening right now, everyone is aware of, they're all about water or lack of water. You know, big storms, floods, droughts, and wildfires. They're all about water or lack of water. And these are increasing. And so, you know, when we hear about a fire in the Northwest or anywhere, and we ask ourselves, you know, people ask themselves, was this caused by climate change? And they begin to say, well, how does CO2 relate to these fires? You know, I think we should ask some other questions, some, I think, obvious questions is, well, why is it dry? How did the water used to get here? And then we just have to look at, there used to be forests all along the Pacific coast in the United States. Those forests are gone. Those forests used to bring moist air in from the ocean. And we used to have incredible soil there. In the valley, we used to have incredible soil, but now it's been killed. So nothing is holding that water. And so we can start to look at the cause of these fires and floods and dryness in a whole different way.
Yeah, and what I think is very powerful about that is that once you start asking these questions,
right?
How did those landscapes hold moisture in the past? How did so that it would be less fire prone? Then that tells you what we can do.
What we can
Whereas,
do.
That's one thing that always concerns me in media conversations when it's just, oh, well, it's about climate change. And then everyone just sort of, shakes their head, because as if we can't do anything about it. We have no agency. But when you ask better questions, that leads you towards possible ways of addressing or minimizing the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that another way to start looking at this, which opens up some of these new possibilities, is to start thinking about the rise in CO2 in the atmosphere isn't the cause of climate change. It's a symptom of climate change. And this is swinging it around. Now, I also in the film point out that everything causes everything else. So every symptom is also a cause, and every cause is also a symptom. But nonetheless, when we start turning things around, we can begin to look at things from a different perspective, and that there are lots of solutions and lots of things that we can do. Covering the land is a huge one. Saving the soil is another big one. Stopping to destroy the forests is probably the biggest one. We should stop right now destroying the forests, and we can start to regrow the forests. And it's actually a rather short list, but it gets complicated. There's lots we can do. Of course, I only spoke to people who were working on solutions and who were positive. I knew that when I started the film, I would be way too depressed if I started to speak to people who weren't working on solutions. So, but there are lots of solutions, and there's lots that can be done immediately, but we have to do it pretty fast.
Right. So would you say that this is ultimately an optimistic film?
Yes, I hope so. So.
I would agree. Did you want to show the flood and fire dynamic?
Sure.
Clip.
Because all the water that should have been in those in-soil reservoirs has rushed off in a flood peak, and we're almost by dictate back to drought. Fires need fuel, and it can only burn when it's dry. If the soil is wet, the grassland is wet, green, it doesn't burn.
I was in Maui. I was in Maui. You know, and when you be, be, and when you look around, you see that the whole interior of the island used to be forests, but they planted sugarcane, and those forests are gone, and the sugarcane fields are drying up. Some of them are still being used, and there is some regenerative agriculture going on, but by destroying the forests and by destroying the land, they brought about these terrible consequences.
Just out of curiosity, how recently were you there?
I was there just right a couple months before the fires.
Oh my, because I was there 5 years ago, and I have a chapter in the Reindeer Chronicles about you know, Maui, because when the last sugar you know, processing plant left, there was this sense among people there of what would be possible. But I also saw that the seeds of what has happened were also there. So yeah, no, it is a pretty stark example. Yeah. I'll just say that I know that people are really coming together on Maui and looking to restore the landscape. You know, local Native Hawaiians and you know, the whole community is coming together. So anyway, that's the report that I get.
That's good.
So, I'm wondering if it would be useful to to start looking at some questions. So what would you say to the concern that this idea, okay, that if we take our eye for a split second off the problem of fossil fuels as being a problem, okay, if we take our eye off that for a second, that will then, you know, contribute to more fossil fuel use, more gas-powered cars, etc.
So I think, first of all, and I make this pretty clear in the film, fossil fuels are a big problem. The mining of fossil fuels destroys the environment, and it's the destruction of the environment which has caused all of our problems. So, you know, the fossil fuel industry does not get a free pass here. And also the pollution, which is carbon particulates and aerosols from the burning of fossil fuels, which are in the air, are a big problem. And we all know this. They cause humid hazes, which warm the planet further. And of course, they cause us all sorts of problems. I do want to say that I often hear people say that CO2 is a pollutant. And in fact, there was a school curriculum that called CO2 a pollutant. And I'm very upset by this. I call CO2 one of the two miracle molecules, because we are all made from CO2, or rather all the carbon in our bodies came initially from CO2 in the atmosphere. CO2 and water make everything through photosynthesis. So I don't want to think of CO2 as a pollutant.
Excellent. How do you respond to those who feel that it's too late to prevent a climate catastrophe?
Well, first of all, I think we're already having climate catastrophes. A lot of people are dying because of the climate change. I don't know if there's going to be some great big catastrophe. I think that we're going to have a series of little catastrophes. I do think we can turn this around. I think we could probably turn it around quite quickly if we had the political will. So I don't see any great big catastrophe happening because of climate change. I just see a gradual decline unless we start to change things.
Are you seeing that people are starting to shift their perspective, and that I'm thinking that that's the right time then for this film to come out. And
Me
I
too.
wonder whether, my book Water in Plain Sight did not come out at the right time, that California drought was easing, and it was just a few months before the 2016 presidential election. So people weren't thinking about water, but people are thinking about climate now and talking about it. And yeah.
Well, I think that there is a lot of people are changing their attitudes. They are beginning to understand that this climate issue is a lot greater than carbon dioxide. There's a lot of other organizations that I'm involved with or in touch with who are dealing with the soil, who are dealing with forests, and one of the things I find most interesting is that we've always known that we're destroying our environments, and we've got to save our environments, and we've got to save nature basically from our relentless destruction. What I'm adding to that picture, or hope to add to that picture, is that this is the solution to the climate crisis. Saving our forests, saving the environments, saving the oceans, saving all of that, that is the solution to the climate crisis. And I think if people have been working on that for a long, long time, so realizing that what they've been doing all along is the solution they've been looking for, I think should, accelerate the effort a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of messaging still is, this will sequester carbon, and and we can save, that they still, and we can have conservation, where it's yes, conservation or regeneration, healing ecosystems is not. Anyway, it's not about, by the way, it is the story.
It is the story, right? And cutting fossil fuels and cutting the destruction caused by fossil fuels is a part of the solution. But we also have to stop cutting down the forests, cover the land, etc. It's very possible. It's very possible. I mean, that the government could make a shift, but politically it's very strange. It's very strange right now. I mean, when I hear of people who want to suck carbon dioxide out of the air and somehow, I don't know what they're going to do with it, and our government is putting $2 billion into that. It's totally absurd, a huge waste of money. So, if some of that effort could be shifted towards the right things, towards saving the forests and saving the land, that would be great.
Yeah. So another question. So you begin the film saying that you didn't expect to be looking and filming as much about water. So there's a lot about water in all forms, water as, liquid, also water as vapor. There's a lot of water vapor in this film. Right. So would you say, this person is asking, and we also know that water vapor is a greenhouse gas. So therefore, is water vapor good or bad for the climate? Where does water vapor fit in terms of climate change?
Well, water vapor is the dominant greenhouse gas. There's no question of that. But the greenhouse gases are good. We need the greenhouse gases. We need all the greenhouse gases, because if we didn't have them, we'd be freezing. But one of the things that water vapor does that the other greenhouse gases don't do is they transport the energy. When you think of water transpiring from a plant and going up into the atmosphere, it takes that energy, the heat of evaporation, upward. And then when it gets higher up, it condenses as mists or as cloud droplets. it condenses, and when it condenses, it releases that heat. And some of that heat escapes into outer space. And not all of it, but a lot of it. And there's a flux on our planet that, energy comes in and energy goes out, and we have to have that equal. And water is one of the main ways that we take that heat, take that energy out of the Earth system into outer space. But the water stays within the Earth system, and it comes down as rain and goes back into the soil and goes up the tree and transpires again. So, it's an incredible system, and water vapor is a huge part of that. And yes, it's a greenhouse gas, and it's, but they're all important.
So water is a main component of the functioning of the Earth system. And what is not good for climate is the disruption or distortion of water cycles.
Exactly.
So that's where we get the problem.
I mean, Walter Yaney says that 95% of the heat dynamics of the planet is governed by water. And that's absolutely true. And we know that to be, think of our own bodies. We cool ourselves by sweating, and plants cool themselves by sweating. It's called transpiration, but it's a very similar process. We've got to move that heat away from the Earth. That's why we need to cover the land too, because those are plants.
Right. So speaking of plants, what is the difference, and which might be more important, or what are the relative importance of regreening, covering the Earth with grasses or with trees?
So trees. I think that the trees are really fundamental to the climate. Grasses are important. Grasses cover the Earth, which is important. Grasses in the prairies, cover the Earth, and they transpire and so forth. But it's trees, and by trees I mean a forest. A forest is an incredibly complex ecosystem which brings water in from the ocean, which transports water, which has all of these functions, being an ecosystem that help regulate the climate. Because the water flows through all living things. The water flows through the soil, through the fungi, through the microorganisms, through the animals, through the plants, etc. We need all of that for the flow of water to happen.
Yeah, so I guess I can add something to that. Trees. Trees are incredibly powerful transpirers, and that an intact forest has lots of functions that moving the moisture and creating shade and helping drive the water cycle. I guess where grasses are very important is that a healthy grass system is building deep soil. Whereas in a forest, the action is more, there's a lot of action below ground, but it's not building soil in the same way. So I guess that's kind of how they work together. I guess in a forest, the carbon is mostly above ground, and with grasses, the carbon is mostly underground.
Yeah, I don't know about the comparing it in that way, but it's true that the grasses build the soil, and then the trees move in. Mm-hmm. Prairies are taken over by forests in many cases through plant succession and so forth. And I like that, forests are amazing things. And one of the things, another gee whiz moment for me was realizing that a dead tree is still a vibrant, alive ecosystem. A dead tree is a living thing because of all of the life within it. And when you see a dead tree that's fallen on the ground in a forest, you think, oh, we should clean that up. But actually, that is what's going to cause the soil, and that is one of the most important parts of that ecosystem. I'm
looking at these questions. how might you respond to the view that eliminating the fossil fuel industry will harm the economy? I don't know.
Eliminating the fossil fuel industry will harm the economy. Wow. I never really thought of that. Yes, I suppose eliminating the fossil fuel industry, as just, if we were to stop fossil fuels right now and not have any alternatives planned, then things would grind to a halt. I think the idea when we talk about energy is that we need alternatives so that we can gradually diminish the use of fossil fuels. But I also like to point out that, that's the energy crisis, not the climate crisis. We have a serious energy crisis, which we've had since the 70s and 80s. And, that's got to be dealt with. And electric cars, for instance, are if they were powered by solar, by the way, electric cars are a good solution to the energy crisis. But they're not really a solution to the climate crisis.
So what you're alluding to here is that often people conflate, climate and energy. So right. The climate crisis becomes framed as an energy problem.
Exactly.
Therefore, by providing clean energy, we will have solved the problem of climate change. Right. And you are bringing us the news that kind of thinking is not what's going to get us to where we want to go.
Exactly. I mean, no matter how much we solve the energy crisis, this is not going to solve the climate crisis. And in many ways, unfortunately, the push for electric cars and the push to electrify the grid and all this stuff, this incredible industrialization that's happening in order to solve the energy crisis, mistaken as the climate crisis, is just causing the climate crisis to get worse and worse. So it's very ironic. But
yes,
yeah,
I would agree, such as what we're dealing with here in Vermont and in many places. A company wants to bring in a large solar field and cut down 45 acres of forest to do so. So yeah, things get kind of very convoluted, and then we get into our whole, the subsidies and the, just what the incentives are. So
I mean, these are very complex things, and I think it's at least good to be able to separate out the issues in order to keep them straight so that we can come up with good solutions. Because it's not like, we don't need solar cells or we don't want solar cells, but there are probably better places to put them than where there was once a forest.
Right. Or where there is a forest now.
But there is a forest that you cut down. Right.
Exactly. Someone asks if you have read the book, The Heat Will Kill You First. And anyway, no. It's a book by Jeff Goodell, who actually used to live in our region. Anyway, so it's focusing on heat, extreme heat. Anything that you want to say that you've encountered in your research or a way of understanding extreme heat that is reflected in your film?
I don't know quite. Extreme heat is like what's happening in countries where the temperature is going way up, and we know very much that this is caused by climate change. Serious problem, and I think the way to solve that is to start repairing the cooling mechanisms which nature provides. And there are fundamental cooling principles, which I go over in the film, which we can all think about. And it gets back to the soil, covering the land, and building the forests back and so forth. We can cool the planet.
Right. And
because
that's
nature
fun.
cools the planet. I mean, the
Yeah.
thesis of the film, which we haven't said, but so maybe I'll close with this. The thesis of the film is that it's the environment, it's nature that regulates the climate, which has kept the climate within a range suitable for life for thousands, if not millions of years. By destroying the environment, we've destroyed the system that regulates the climate. But if we regenerate life, if we regenerate these forests and fields and wetlands and oceans, then we can start to bring things back into balance. I hope. But we got to do it pretty fast.
Excellent. I think, thank you. Thank
you.
you. It's a
Thank you.
wonderful film. I hope everyone, gets a chance and makes the chance to see it. And I think Paula wanted to say a few words before we all say goodnight to each other.
Okay. Well, thank you both. Thank you both very much for this conversation and for the work that you each have done, making sure that people understood that there really were possibilities for restoring, regenerating the planet in a variety of ways, some of which you can do right in your own backyard. Basic things, deep paving, getting rid of whatever hard surfaces you can, getting your town to stop using pesticides because that totally poisons our water and makes the land unable to absorb water. There are many solutions. You can check the Biodiversity for a Livable Climate website as well. But I would like to really urge folks, if they're in the vicinity at all, to come to the film screening at Tufts University on October 14th and meet John and Judy and a number of other people in the films, some of whom are, on the panel, maybe all of them. And, get a sense really of what your community as a community can do and how you can impact your own municipality, because we may not be able to change the world, but we can have some impact on our municipalities, our towns, regulations, and that's well worth doing.
And there's one simple thing which is wonderful, that if you eat good, tasty, locally grown food, then you are helping to solve the climate crisis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And supporting farmers who are farming organically is another really important thing you can do. Farmers markets are actually very significant. They're not only wonderful, but they are significant. I do want to add, though, that the issue of heat in this country is really also a part of the global picture, because the heat trajectory is exponential. It's not going up a little bit each year. It's going up in an exponential way. There are cities in this country that have had heat over 95 degrees for weeks on end. And some cities have had 118-degree heat for periods of days. It is dangerous for not only urban dwellers, farm workers are suffering. Extreme heat damages people's kidneys. It's a significant problem right now. And in addition to helping groups that are making sure that there's more safety provided for farm workers, we actually have to think about doing everything that we can to cool things down as quickly as we can. And work with that sense of urgency in mind.
A tree is an air conditioner.
A tree is definitely an air conditioner. It's several air conditioners if it's a sizable tree.
Right.
And as And it's not just the tropical rainforests that we're talking about. For years, we only talked about the tropical rainforests, but the boreal forests, the forests in Canada are boreal forests, mid-latitude forests, are actually just as important for cooling as tropical forests. So every standing tree needs protection. And
Exactly.
becoming aware of the logging practices in your region and in your state. Wood is not a renewable fuel. It takes the claim that it is renewable is fallacious. Okay, it takes 50 years for a new tree to achieve the function of what a mature tree will do. So make sure it's not part of your state's renewable energy portfolio.
Yeah, right.
Many things that you can be proactive about. But back to thanking you. Back to thanking you for your work and for your conversation. And want to also thank our co-host, the GBH Forum Network, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at Tufts University. And that link you can find on the Bio4Climate website, which is in chat. And there's a direct link to registering for the film there. And there's a general link for just seeing everything else that's in the website. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.